Today we're going to introduce you to Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. Now, the author is quoted as, "You don't have to burn books to destroy a culture. Just get people to stop reading them." And that gives us a good introduction into what the book's theme will be. So Fahrenheit 451, as you notice, it's degrees, and that is actually the temperature at which book paper will catch fire on its own and burn. But first, a little bit about the author. Ray Bradbury was born in Waukegan, Illinois, which is near Chicago, in August 22nd, 1920. Now, his family moved frequently when he was young, but they finally settled in Los Angeles in 1934. Now, as a young boy, Bradbury was interested in magic and had aspirations of becoming a magician. Now, this interest in magic later turned into a love for writing. He began writing stories at age 11, but he received no formal education beyond high school. Some of his more famous works are The Weird Tales, which is a famous pulp science fiction. It's one of his first novels. The Martian Chronicles launched his writing career. That's the one that really made him famous in 1950. But his most famous, arguably to date, is the Fahrenheit 451 novel from 1953. He's also published over 500 short stories, novels, plays, and poems in his wide span of career. He's also written for Alfred Hitchcock Presents and The Twilight Zone, and he's also written the screenplay for John Huston's Moby Dick, so Hollywood is quite familiar with Ray Bradbury. He also helped design Spaceship Earthride for Disney World's Epcot Center. So let's take a look at the book Fahrenheit 451. Well, it began as a story about a fireman, Guy Montag, in a short story called The Fireman. It was such a popular short story that Bradbury decided to expand it in 1953 into the full novel that we know. It is classified as science fiction. So what is it about Fahrenheit 451 that gets people to read it? Well, a lot of times it is the criticism of it. Basically, what Bradbury is doing is protesting what he believed to be the invasiveness of editors into writing and books in the 1950s. Now, editors had strict control of what books were going to be printed and what topics were being printed. And Bradbury thought it impaired originality and the creativity of writers. Now, this on a more social aspect, not just from his personal criticism of the editors, there's more about society that he's critical of. Now, Bradbury's warning against the danger of suppressing thought through censorship. He also, at the time, was very wary about 1950s oppressive government. When it's left unchecked, it can do irreparable damage to a society by limiting creativity of its people. And at the time that Bradbury was printing Fahrenheit 451, we had the HUAC, the House of Un-American Activities Committee here in the United States, led by Joseph McCarthy, and we had the Communist Red Scare going on at the time. We also look at this not only as science fiction, but Fahrenheit 451 has a sense of a dystopia, an imaginary world in which the desire for order results in harmony at the expense of individual rights. What are the themes? Well, there's three that you could talk about. One is knowledge versus ignorance. Basically, they're destroying their books and destroying knowledge in order to promote ignorance of the people at large. And the search for knowledge often destroys ignorance, so people looking for the few books that were left over. Conformity versus individuality. Usually you want to conform to the norms of society, so you need to start asking, what are the norms of society, and do the norms endanger society's well-being, or does it help society? And then, of course, with the personal criticism and the social criticism that Bradbury had, censorship is going to be one of the themes as well. So let's look at the idea of what it is to censor. Now, a person authorized to examine books, films, or other material and to remove or suppress what is considered morally, politically, or otherwise objectionable is called a censor. It is also an official, usually as in the armed forces, who examines personal mail and official dispatches to remove information considered a secret or a risk to security. So sometimes censoring could be beneficial. Sometimes it certainly hurts society. So where do we see censorship in our own lives? Do you see it perhaps on the internet? Do you see it from your parents talking about the technologies that you have? Could it be a censorship of the press? Maybe of the books or the song lyrics that you listen to? But let's go back from today into Bradbury's time where there was more censorship. So back before his writing in 1953, but he was still alive to know that there was book burnings going on. Specifically, he would have remembered hearing about the Nazi book burnings on May 10th, 1933 over in Europe. Now, one way the Nazis would cleanse the country of un-German thoughts was through censorship. A brown shirt or member of the SA would be throwing more fuel, their un-German books, into a roaring fire in Berlin on May 10th. In Berlin itself, 20,000 books were burned during a student rally. Now, the suppression of free speech and ideas was a tactic of Joseph Goebbels' Ministry of Propaganda. Now, target this time was usually anti-Nazi, Jewish-authored, and so-called degenerate books, but it would escalate. Heinrich Heine, one of the authors at the time, would have said, where they have burned books, they will end in burning human beings. So then let's go back to the time of the novel. Fahrenheit 451 was released in 1953, and we have this sense of censorship coming from our government in America. Senator Joseph McCarthy was leading a witch hunt to find suspected communist sympathizers in the government. He also was going to Hollywood and to Broadway and looking for writers, movie makers, and performers, which might have also been suspected communist sympathizers. Now, most of his findings were unfounded. Mostly he had no evidence. It was all accusations. However, this would ruin the careers of many people because of their links with communism, which wasn't illegal at the time. One of the other novels or plays that actually has a lot of McCarthyism and the Communist Red Scare besides Fahrenheit 451 would be the play The Crucible by Arthur Miller, also published at the same time. So who were a few of the accused? Well, some of the more famous would be Leonard Bernstein, who's a composer and conductor, Charlie Chaplin, the actor, Bartley Crumb, an attorney. There's a civil rights activist and author called W.E.B. Du Bois, Langston Hughes, a New York author, Arthur Miller, who we already mentioned, who wrote The Crucible. He was a playwright and essayist, Clifford Odets, who was an author, and the physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer, who is known as the father of the atomic bomb. More of the accused: Paul Robeson, who is an actor and athlete, singer, author, and political and civil rights activist; Edward G. Robinson, the actor; Waldo Salt, the author; the folk singer Pete Seeger; the jazz musician Artie Shaw; Howard Da Silva, who is an actor; Paul Sweezy, who is an economist and the founder-editor of the Monthly Review; the physicist Sen Hussein; and Orson Welles, an actor, author, and director. So as you can see, they weren't particularly targeting physicists or civil rights activists or people in Hollywood. They weren't just targeting people of color or white people. They targeted everybody of every kind of background and every kind of career. But let's go back to Fahrenheit 451. So let's take a look at some of the symbols. In science fiction, a lot of times you'll see symbolism very prominent, so we can tie what is going on in the sci-fi with what we tie to ourselves in reality today. Now, what is a symbol? Well, symbols are objects, characters, figures, or even colors that are used to represent abstract ideas or concepts. What is one of the Fahrenheit 451 symbols? Well, blood is one of them. Now, usually blood is a symbol of a human being's repressed soul or primal instinctive self. In this particular book, they look at it more as a snake machine. So we have the hearth and the salamander. And the hearth and the salamander are going to represent the fireplace, which heats the home, and the hearth usually symbolizes home. Now, the salamander is the official symbol of firemen in Fahrenheit 451, and there's ancient beliefs that the salamander comes from fire, and it's unaffected by the flames. So it's a very good symbol for the firefighters. Another symbol would be mirrors. I mean, usually when we think of the symbol of mirror, it is usually a sense of self-understanding. You can see yourself in reality. And it means to see oneself clearly. Now, the characters of Fahrenheit 451. Let's start off with our main character, Guy Montag. He's the protagonist. He's a 30-year-old fireman who makes his living by burning books and by burning the houses where the books are kept illegally. However, he's going to experience a drastic change in the novel. Remember, he's a protagonist, so he's got to be learning. His wife, Mildred Montag, she's been married to him for 10 years. She epitomizes the shallowness and complacentness of society. There's all sorts of censorship going on. The book burning, the firemen are working at burning the houses and burning the books down. And she's very complacent about what is going on. And then she, of course, has her friends, such as Mrs. Phelps Mrs.Bowles. They're just as ignorant and silly and complacent as Mrs. Montag. But then we meet Clarrise McClellan. She's a 17-year-old girl. Montag is drawn to her because she's basically an opposite of anyone that he's ever met before, and she embodies what is positive about the human spirit. And then we have Captain Beatty, who is in charge of Montag. He's going to be the antagonist. He's head of the fire department. His sole purpose in life is to destroy the books. He's going to act as our big brother character here. We also have the mechanical hound. Basically, it's a terrible triumph of modern technology. It's programmed to track down and destroy any victim that his sensors are set to. So if somebody's not conforming to society, you're going to meet the mechanical hound, and it's not going to be good. And then we have Professor Faber. He's an aging intellectual in a world where it seems there's no place for him. Somebody who understands books, who trusts books and the knowledge within them. So, of course, he disapproves of current society, but he lacks the courage to stand up and say what society has done wrong. His point in the book is to give Montag the inspiration to do so. We also meet Granger, who is another intellectual and former author. He's a leader of a group of hobos outside of society. He represents this idea of outcasts. So it was a pleasure to tell you about the introduction to Fahrenheit 451. If you like what you've seen, please maybe comment on what else you would like to see on this channel. And if you do like the channel, I'd appreciate it if you subscribed. Thanks for stopping by.